Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tatiana Holovatenko. I am the lecturer of Boris Hrynchenko Kyiv University, and in this video, I'm going to share activities in reading and writing for translanguaging practices with you. So let's start with the definition of translanguaging. From the pedagogical point of view, this is a special pedagogy that covers the plan by the teacher usage of different languages for input and output, as well as planned strategies of usage different linguistic repertoire of students. This definition is suggested by the Jason Cenoz, and you can see the citation below. The first activity I'm going to share with you is called Translanguaging Shifts. It aims to enrich students' vocabulary and encourage the usage of their whole linguistic repertoire. Students and the teacher work with the text, and when there is an unknown word for students, the teacher translates it or gives the explanation not in the medium of instruction. By doing this, the teacher encourages building the vocabulary not only in the language of instruction, but in other languages represented in the classroom. By doing this, it encourages multilingualism of individual students. Next activity is called an online research, and it aims to activate students' linguistic repertoire. Students do their research in different languages. It can be their first language or their native language. It could be any language they know, and they are free to use it. After this activity, students are grouped or work in pairs and share something they learned as a result of their research with each other. And by doing this, they are using their medium of instruction. So there are two steps in this activity. First step, research in the language other than the medium of instruction, and discussion in the medium of instruction. The next activity is called Translanguaging Jigsaw, and it aims to develop cross-linguistic understanding of the text. This activity is pretty tricky to organize, but it's very useful in terms of encouraging multilingualism of individual students and a group as a whole. So students work individually with the text. It can be a fable text, it can be a fairy tale. To tell you the truth, the easier the text is, the more effective this activity is. So they're working with the text in languages other than the medium of instruction. It could be in their native language or the language they are free in using it. Students work in groups of 4 and discuss the story in the medium of instruction, for example, in English. And after that, teachers provide the same story in English, and they compare their stories they discussed in their languages and in English. By doing so, teachers encourage students to pay attention to different chunks of language and to different grammar and differences in text between the language they worked in and English. The next activity is Translingual Answers. It aims to encourage students to use their linguistic repertoire and use language chunks in the English as medium of instruction. Students are asked a question. This should be an open-end question, and they should be given some time to write their answers in their native language or their language 1. By doing this, by writing these answers on slips of papers, we don't spend much time on grammar because students are free in their native language. After that, the teacher collects slips of papers and mixes them in a box. After that, the teacher distributes these slips of paper between the group. and the teacher asks students to report answers of their peers, to agree or disagree with them, to discuss them in the medium of instruction, so in English, for example. By doing this, we don't spend much time on expressing our thoughts in native language, but at the same time, we are encouraging using more and more languages in the classroom, and we are paying more attention to analyzing these answers, to working with them, to agreeing and disagreeing with these answers. Okay, next activity is translanguaging reading. This activity aims to make students aware of the way the language one can be useful when trying to understand the academic text in English. At the pre-reading stage, we are learning new vocabulary with students so that they can understand this text. In the wild reading stage, we are reading the text, and after that, in the post-reading stage, we are working on the vocabulary of the text. For example, we have the chart, and we worked with this text, let's say in English, and in this text there was a word combination digestive system, and students in our group are free in Basque and Spanish, so we translate these expressions into other languages, and by doing this we are finding common words and expressions, words that are used in a similar way in these languages, and also it helps students to understand the text in English. This text can be in their native language, in the language of minority, or in English. So by doing this, by comparing this text, they are encouraged to understand the text more deeply. And the next activity is Multilingual Reading Circle. It aims to activate students' vocabulary and encourage their deeper understanding of the text. And in this activity, teacher reads the text in, let's say, Arabic. And after that, in the discussion, he or she translates this text into Urdu. And after that, the explanation goes on in English. By doing it, this text is analyzed in 3 languages, and students understand more of the vocabulary and grammar, which is mentioned in the text, and by going through these three times repetition of the text in different languages, the understanding of this text is scientifically proven to be higher than if it was read just in one language, in, for example, Arabic. Okay. The next activity are concerned with writing. Let's have a look at them. The first one is translingual chunks of language. In this activity, we aim to activate students' linguistic repertoire and reinforce their vocabulary and learn chunks of language as a whole, not just individual words, but how this is said in different languages. So for this activity, teachers should download the Excel chart. The link is on the slide. They copy this to their private Google Drive, and they write down the sentence in English. And then you can see it in the corner of this slide. For example, my name is Tanya, and then the teacher scrolls down a little bit so that the English version is not seen by his students. After that, students see the translation of this sentence in their languages. We can see here a list of languages, but it can be changed. So in this Excel chart, there are language codes, and you can change them into the languages which are represented in your classroom. So let's say it's German, French, Turkish, Italian, Portuguese, Korean, Arabic, Spanish, Lithuanian, and Chinese. And by reading these sentences in these languages, they try to restore how this sentence was in English. This sentence is pretty simple, so there won't be any big challenges for students, but when we refer to the usage of phrasal verbs and special language chunks, then this activity is quite useful. Students try to correct their mistakes in languages because this is done by Google Translate language code, and they try to identify the English sentence and write it, and after that we compare the grammar and we have a look at these language chunks and how they work in English and the other languages represented in the classroom. The next activity is the multilingual postcard. It aims to activate students' linguistic repertoire and reinforce their vocabulary. And again, it aims to learn chunks of language and practice them in writing. This activity is inspired by post-crossing. And if you're a post-crosser, or if you happen to have some postcards sent by your foreign friends, you can bring them into your classroom, and the text on the postcard, including should include the translation of each paragraph into other languages represented in the classroom. It can be 2 or more languages. And students try to identify similar structures in these languages, similar grammar or chunks of language. And after the comparison of this sentence, they have a look at cognates. Cognates are like word combinations used in the similar way in these languages, and they compare subjects and grammar, auxiliary verbs, and these multilingual postcards in this way help not only to encourage using different languages, but also to widen the worldview of the students. The next activity is called a reflection journal, and it aims to relieve the writing stress in language 2 and allow students enough time to structure their writing pieces. And we read the text in native language and in mother tongue, and after that students choose a quote from the text and write their response in the medium of instruction, for example, in English. So to help students structure their ideas, we can suggest them a chart where they write this part of the text. It can be just a sentence which they want to dwell on. And after that, in the second column of the chart, they write, "It reminds me of," and they write their ideas in the medium of instruction. It can be just a pretty simple idea, but it should be structured in English, and by going from the mother tongue to the medium of instruction, and by working on just a very small part of the text, we encourage students to write their ideas freely and not to be afraid to write in language 2. Because as we all know, sometimes writing in language 2 can be pretty stressful due to not knowing how to express our ideas in those compositions or emails or letters. This stress is relieved by writing just a very small part, a very small piece of writing. Okay, the next activity is called the dictation, and it aims to improve students' writing skills and to revise the vocabulary. Teachers dictate words in language 1 and students write them in language 2. This is one of the ways how it can work. And it encourages translanguaging, and at the same time it helps students to build those correlation between these words in their mother tongue and in the foreign language. At the same time, some of these activities are highly criticized by those who are representing communicative approach to learning languages, because according to the communicative approach, we should skip this part of, we shouldn't include language 1 into the education. But as it was scientifically proven, it helps to relieve the stress while learning a new language, and building new knowledge on the previous knowledge of language can also help students to encourage their multilingualism, and it can be quite beneficial for them. The next slide is devoted to conditions of effective use in translanguaging. The first one is level-specific tasks. If the tasks we suggest to our students are not suited to their needs and are too difficult for them, they can be quite discouraging for them. Again, as it was mentioned in one of the previous activities, when students feel difficulty and stress because of writing long text, we can help them to write just a short sentence they want to dwell on. And this can help them to develop at their own level. The next condition is taking the age of students into account. In one of the activities suggested above, we were comparing the text and different cognates in different languages. But at the same time, if we are talking about young learners, these cognates can be quite difficult for them, and they cannot be ready to discuss difficult ideas in other languages. So we can just make this age-appropriate activity. Instead of reading some academic text, they can read a fable or a short fairy tale, or they can read some short story which is adapted to their level of language and their age. The next condition is knowing the language repertoire of the group. The teacher can't just ignore what happens in the classroom. And of course, we can't know all the languages in the classroom, but at least knowing some words or some instructions in those languages, knowing what languages students know, can encourage sharing these languages between each other in the group. The next condition is allowing extra time for giving instructions. When we're talking about different languages in one classroom and using translanguages effectively, we should take into account that for some of the students, multilingualism is better and is more developed on reading and on listening. And for some students, it's quite easier to speak in another language or to write something in another language. So we are talking about receptive and reproductive or productive multilingualism. So allowing some extra time for giving instruction, to paraphrasing them, to giving the example or showing with the teacher's actions, we can help students to relieve the stress and understand what the teacher means and what is expected from them. And also the next condition is providing students with sufficient resources. So knowing the language repertoire of our students is one point, and the next point is providing these resources in these languages. So we are talking about, if we are talking about the text, so this text should be in different languages, and it should be proofread by those who are natives in this language, or it should be taken from the native speakers' resources. And also those resources should cover the instructions we give and some materials we provide to students. By sticking to these conditions, we can help our students to develop multilingually, and translanguaging practice can be only one step, one of the practices to develop this multilingualism. And thank you for your attention. Glory to Ukraine.